Hello and welcome to what is a first on my channel, and please everyone give a big round of thanks to the Foo, as my mother and I call him, the Fleet of Oceans as you might know him, who has joined me to discuss some stuff to do with the Red Fleet project that he's been working on. Now, I will say this, he's being very brave, because as you all know on this channel, I've been wanting to get into doing videos with other people and having other people on the channel. But I've been a bit scared because honestly, tech-wise, it's always been a bit of an issue and wondering whether it's going to work, how it's going to work, what's going to happen, and whether it'll work. And honestly, before when I've done this, Jamie Seedell did the work for me. Now, and he very kindly did all the editing and recording. This time, it's all on me, so all the complaints are mine. And the Fleet of Oceans, the Foo, as my mum calls him, generously volunteered to be the first. In return, I chose a topic which he's very familiar with, i.e. the Red Fleet and its timeline, because he's been working on this project for a while, and specifically for the Year of the Carrier, we're going to be getting into some of the stuff about the Graf Zeppelin. But before we do that, this video is titled, of course, Teasers of the Red Fleet. It's a bit of an introduction to it. So I'm going to ask the Foo himself to introduce the Red Fleet and the whole discussion of it, and then I'm going to start, hopefully not causing him to run for the hard alcohol, chocolate, and various other things because of what I'm about to do about the Graf Zeppelin in it.
Well, hello everyone. My name, as some of you may or may not know, is the Fleet of Oceans. Some of you who are in Drax Discord server may know me as Discount Drakinifel or the Rambler or things of that nature. And Dr. Clarke has been very kind to ask me to come on. Well, first of all, I shanghaied him into becoming part of the Red Fleet timeline project I've been working on for some time, which started about two years ago now. When a pair of fairly innocent questions were asked pretty much within 5 minutes of each other in a ramblings I did a long time ago, long before I started recording them, around 2021, I believe. Which is basically, what if the Soviets completed Graf Zeppelin after the war, and what if Sovietsky Soyuz was far more complete and fitted out when the war breaks out, so much so that it is actually cheaper to finish her than it is to break her up after the war. And then the person involved asked a question of what happens with these two ships. Does the Red Fleet get built? And that set off a massive tangent that led to a timeline that has been spoken of and written about multiple times across the years. It's been re-edited, redone, reworked slightly, and I will admit, from terms of historical accuracy and realism, a lot of what is discussed is slightly silly, but we had fun doing it, and I decided that since so many questions were being asked about it on the regular, that I would
Can I add
finally...
to that? Questions have been asked which have been inspired on my own Patreon system, which is where people might wonder why my channel often seems to get various Soviet alternate history questions asked as Patreon questions and in the votes, etc. There is a reason for this, and it is principally, I would argue, this project's fault, because it's given a lot of people ideas. That they already had enough already before they even had this. It's just gives them extra ideas.
I may have poured ammunition onto the idea of a Red Fleet post-war, and I may have left Dr. Clarke, Drac, and others picking up the bill.
It's been an interesting tab to deal with on occasion.
But yeah, so I am here as sort of a... Dr. Clarke knows far more about the structures of ships and the actual capabilities of naval facilities than I ever could. So
No, you could. You just have to basically have no social life for about nearly 30 years and just focus in on the history and development of these things. and then wonder why you get to the age of nearly only a few years shy of 40 and going, so why is my social life reading history books and talking naval history with people? Oh, I enjoy it anyway. It doesn't matter.
But yes, so there's a lot. There's a lot we've got to cover, but we are trying to keep it limited. Just going to put this out here. Spoiler warnings for parts of the Red Fleet timeline. If you want to save yourself for the full video, which will be coming out at some point in the next month or two, provided I can get everyone together, because I've got to get 6 people in a Ramblings channel all at the same time from multiple time zones, because without all of them, well, most of them, 3 of them helped create it with me. One of them is the artist for the timeline who creates all of the wonderful warships and helps provide visuals for it. And the 5th is Dr. Clarke, who has been added in recently, basically by me dragging him into it.
Yeah.
So, but again,
it's naval history. I'm happily dragged.
But again, spoiler warning.
Besides, as I've told you, I was on Monday. That was probably yesterday when we're recording this. I was just quietly working in my office, and I got a message from my mum going, "The Foo's live! Are you joining him this week?" I went, "No, it's a really interesting discussion. You should be part of this." So I turned it on YouTube and went, "I'm going to comment just in the chat, just in YouTube." That's all. Just a few riders, and then I get I turn up in again. So, yeah, it's basically you're one of the ones my mum listens to. My mum enjoys the long ramblings.
Oh, God knows how she thinks God knows how she thinks when I'm at my worst. Because I can get somewhat irate.
She's really interested in this Red Fleet timeline because you have to remember, she was around for a lot of the potentials of the Red Fleet timeline. For her, it's very interesting. She worked at Lloyd's Register for many, many of these years that I covered. The maritime insurance company. So, yeah. Yeah,
so I do you so how are we going to proceed with this first? Am I going to give a
before, if you give us a bit of an overview and timeline, and I will say this, I will say my one objection is I still think they should have gone with the Nelsonsky, the Nelrodsky design. I think the original Nelrodsky design of Battleship is far prettier than the Sovietsky Soyuz design.
Oh, most likely.
And I think they've actually got them completed. They had 16-inch guns. They had.
Oh, did they?
They were 9 16-inch guns.
No, I thought they were 9 14s.
Nope, 9 16-inch guns, and those would have been started. They had the design ready in 1931. So if they'd started on that, then there is no way they couldn't have completed at least 2 of them by the time World War II began. Come on.
Oh, completely.
Even the Soviet mess of infrastructure could actually do that in 8 years.
Oh, completely. I could do it in 6, actually.
Probably. They might actually be on, but they might even have units 3 and 4 in service.
Yeah,
and that would be fun for the Germans to deal with, the Soviets having 4 16-inch gun battleships. I mean,
yes.
I'm not sure anything happens to Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, but there is a whole possibility that they just don't get built in that circumstance.
Possibly. But we had to go with Sovietsky, so it's important to bear in mind that a lot of artwork, and by artwork I mean designs for the ships and various other images of them, have been created by Sea Otters, who some of you may or may not know. He's done a lot of work
on my channel as well.
Yeah, he's done a lot of work in naval art, and for me, out of his free time, and I haven't been paying him, bless him, but he's fantastic at what he does. And so we are locked into the Sovietsky Soyuz, and as she's christened into the Red Fleet timeline, Vladimir Lenin, but as we all colloquially know her, Graf Zepplinski. But I will point out that, so this is basically
she's going to be the primary topic of the discussion today, because there are some great things you have planned for her.
Yeah. So in order to detail, or rather get this discussion going, I need to lay the scene. So basically, there are 2 points of divergence that allow for what I'm about to describe. The first is that the Red Fleet program, as envisaged by Stalin in the pre-war, is looking at building 2 Sovietsky-Soyuz class battleships. Only 2 compared to the massive numbers they planned to build and started building historically. This meant that Soviet resources were pulled multiple ways, rather than trying to focus on finishing a few ships just to prove the concept, mature the shipbuilding methods, and see what worked. Whereas in our timeline, they actually take the sensible approach. The Soviet fleet decides they're going to build a pair of battleships, basically as almost prototypes, if you will. See what works, work through the engineering problems building this pair of ships, focus our resources on just at least getting a pair of ships done, and this leads to Sovietsky Soyuz being further along. It's also worth pointing out that Sovietsky Ukraina, the roles are reversed, so Sovietsky Soyuz is further along than Sovietsky Ukraina is in our timeline, which is the reverse of what happens historically. Sovietsky Ukraina being built in Ukraine is further along historically, whereas the reverse is true here.
It's one of those interesting things. Some people, they put Soyuz is technically 21% complete, but a lot of her sections haven't been added in yet to the hull, so she's 21% complete, but not all those bits are together. Whereas Ukraina is roughly 18% complete, but all those bits are together.
Yeah.
Which causes great fun when people start looking and going, well, she's more complete. Yes, but she's more assembled. So which one's further along? Take your choice.
Yeah, but in this timeline, Soyuz, by the outbreak of Operation Barbarossa, is 50% complete. She's been launched. She's fitting out in Leningrad. It's a...
So she's still laid down in July 1938.
Yeah.
But she's 50% complete by 1941.
Yeah, because they're focusing on these 2 ships. Ukraina, the reason that we don't get 2 Soviet battleships in the Red Fleet timeline is that Ukraina is scuttled rather catastrophically by the Germans when they surrender Sevastopol to the Russian counterattacks.
Okay.
Because it's important to bear in mind that Sevastopol is taken by the Germans. Leningrad never is during the Second World War. Leningrad is sieged for ages, but it's not taken. And it's hard to scuttle a ship without actually, having the ability to put charges on her. And speaking of scuttling, this takes me to my second point, Graf Zeppelin. Now, Graf Zeppelin was... Well, she wasn't in the best nick, she was fairly complete by the
for something which was very much an experimental carrier in so many ways because of the approach the Germans had taken in building her.
I mean, she was powering the city that she was docked in, I believe. They were running her turbines to provide power generation for some port facilities. But then she was sabotaged. I think they took charges to her engines, or something like that. That's the second key difference. The yard is overrun before Graf Zeppelin can be meaningfully sabotaged. Therefore, she is of more value to the Russians as an actual unit worth rebuilding. Although I will point out that in the Red Fleet timeline, as it stands currently, as in which we're trying to lock it down, we've pretty much mostly got it locked down. Work resumes on Sovietsky Soyuz in 1946. And it takes 2 years for the Russians to figure out exactly what they're going to do with Graf Zeppelin. Sovietsky Soyuz, to complete her, takes till 1951. And she sees, and this is a little bit spoiler here, she sees some service off Korea. Graf Zepplinski, Vladimir Lenin, doesn't enter service until 1952. It takes the Russians in the Red Fleet timeline 48, 49, 50, 4 years to complete Graf Zepplinski to a design they are happy with.
But critically, both are before Stalin dies in October 1952?
Yes, both are before Stalin dies in 1952. Now, there are other ships completed within this period by the Russians, but that is outside the scope of this particular discussion. And would be far too many spoilers.
Actually, no. He dies in March 1953, doesn't he?
Yes.
It's October 1952. He decides to step down as General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
He changes title, basically.
That's all he does, though. He still runs the show.
Yeah. It's just fun, because that's sort of beginning of decline of his, in terms of his actual involvement in the day-to-day running. He's still just as powerful.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
He's a fun guy. A really fun guy.
For a given value of fun.
Yes, but crucially, if the ships are completed while he's in power, they're going to get completed because, as we all know, Stalin loved a big battle fleet. He was a true dictator. He really did consider the size of things to be important, and the number of those size of things to be important. Honestly, I think there's a certain movie which came out recently where, the dictator being played by... Is it Sacha Baron Cohen, the comedian, in it?
I think so.
And he goes, it needs to be more pointy. People all have gone around various dictators imagining who that might have been modelled on. I'm fairly sure Stalin. Because I can imagine Stalin...
It's possible.
Stalin would never be so ill-informed as that particular dictator, but I could also imagine him being just obsessed with it looking more pointy and being scarier.
Possibly.
He is that way inclined.
As we've often said in the Red Fleet timeline, and will no doubt say in the video, and I'll leave it to my friend who usually says it in that video to say it, but I get to say it here. When Stalin says, I want a Red Fleet, you jump and ask how many ships on the way down.
You ask how many ships, or do you just jump up and down and start building ships until he tells you to stop, kind of like the Joseph Stalin 3? Which didn't even stop when he died. Let's be honest, they didn't cancel that tank for years past its use-by date because no one wanted to stop something with Joseph Stalin on it. Asking questions on the way down sounds like a good way to land to a lead injection.
Possibly.
Just build ships. So, with that all in mind, the Soviet Union now has a battleship. Other people are going to respond. But what's really interesting me, and what's the point of today's session, is, the Vladimir Leninitsky, or rather the Graf Zepplinski.
Yeah.
This is a ship which... Is it Graf Zepplinski? Oh, not Spacey. It's the reason I'm distracted is I'm just remembering this is a ship which... Look, here is the fundamental thing I often have to explain about German ship designs, and the reason why I am sometimes rude about them, or often rude about them. It's because they have so much potential. But the polycratic route they have for designing ships, and by the way, if you want a good example of how this can muck up ships, look no further than things like the Zumwalt and some of the modern Western ship designs. And and even the Chinese, to an extent, you can look at some of their ships and see the same thing. Design by committee produces a very interesting ship which will have a lot of issues and competing sections, because every committee has their own political patron saint, and you can't disrupt any of them because it just will cause you trouble and infighting and people to get shot. In a dictatorship, in this world, it will cause lots of people to start funding. In the West, the equivalent, instead of shooting people, what they do is they go fund a load of consultancies and blow your budget on consultants instead of building ships, which is why you end up with so few ships being built. And the consultancies tend to come back with 6 of one or half a dozen of the other. Make your mind up. So the thing is with the German ships, if we consider the Graf Zeppelin, it has a lot of good, interesting ideas on paper. Putting all of them into a carrier, especially your first carrier, turns it from being a carrier which has had a few interesting tweaks into an experimental carrier. which is going to be very hard to turn into a practical carrier, because it's full of so many different new technologies. And I'm fairly certain that some of them would not work with the needs of a carrier operation, a fleet carrier operation. I've done whole videos on that. The reality becomes you won't be able to tell what doesn't work. This is why if you're talking about the battle of the Royal Navy building the Grand Fleet and various other navies when they're doing this, they tend to be the next generation of ships when they're building them with an iterative design process like that. They have no more than 3 major changes. They'll have new generations of stuff, but they'll have no more than 3 major changes. So they'll change the hull form, or they'll change the gun size, or they'll change the turret layout, etc. So if there's a problem, you can focus in on what's mucking this up and making this not work. You can find it out. Now, the thing about the Graf Zepplinski is you're planning on it going on not just into the immediate post-war period when honestly we haven't discussed yet, and I'm going to be very interested in your ideas of what air group she would actually be operating, and some pictures have been sent, so I will put them up. I will put them up.
I'm sure I should have to tell you which is as finished and which is post rebuild.
Yeah.
Because one is very clearly... bear in mind, those aircraft are not indicative of her air group. They are placeholders.
But the thing is... and this I've got to... I'm sort of asking... One of the reasons I sort of say with the whole 4 years is... For them to get an aircraft carrier, especially one they can convert to a angled flight deck carrier, considering all the various things she had going on in her hull construction, and with the German fleet, that was interesting because the German warships, well, how do I put this? They had a lot more riveting going on than perhaps we are often aware, and riveting and an angled flight deck do not necessarily make for a riveting decision. They do have... please note, yes, before someone goes away, they did have welding as well. But one of the problems with the Graf Zeppelin... sorry, why do I keep going Graf Spey? Sorry, I recorded a video of the Graf Spey first thing this morning. Then I did another video which is on HMS Hermes, Hosho, and Langley. And now I'm doing this, and my brain is frying itself. Also had the fact that when I went in for food, I'm sorry to say, I found the kitchen occupied and decided I was going to get away quickly while I had my stomach intact. So, with the Germans, some of the subsequent changes and modifications had not been done by the same methodology. So, honestly, how are you getting around this? How are you coping with this? How are you making this work in this timeline? Is it literally the Soviets are doing something which looks like it works, or is it something that's really going to work?
Well, Graf Zeppelin was always, in the Red Fleet timeline, intended to be a... she's always intended to be a carrier that... how do I put this? She's sort of a get Russian naval aviation at sea off the ground. Basically.
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice that while she's very heavily armed pre-refit, post-refit, she's very lightly armed, even for... Like, she has a pair of twin-arm missile launchers and a bunch of AK guns of various calibers. But that's it.
Mm-hmm.
She's basically kept around and to basically keep, because then the Red Fleet decides they want to settle on a carrier size, a size strength of about 6, and that's what they want to settle with. They want to settle with 6 carriers as their basically their God, go on, think, man, think.
Fleet structure?
As their fleet structure. That number is not a coincidence, but that will be reason for that later. I'm just going to send you something else because this is important for what comes later. But these images are not for release; they're just to give some examples for you to look upon as we're doing this. So that
I hope you don't mind. Some of the
those.
earlier pictures might have shown up on the screen.
Oh no, that's fine. The earlier ones are. The earlier ones are. That's Graf Zepplinski. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
These two are not until we've actually made the proper thing. So that ship with the 10 on it.
Mm-hmm.
That is the carrier that the Reds build in the mid 60s.
Okay.
That's the ship. That's the purpose-built carrier that they build after they've got operational experience with Graf Zepplinski. She's designed to work with Graf Zepplinski on a rotational basis or as part of a two-ship carrier force.
Okay.
It's why she's often referred to by the Russians as her half-sister. She's basically because she's the same size, but she's much more efficient and better in every way.
That
Graf
would not
Zepplinski
be hard
works.
after the experience of working with Graf Zepplinski.
Yeah, Graf Zepplinski works for the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
She is basically she is a carrier that can launch aircraft. It's important to bear in mind that while when completed she looks fairly normal and she operates all piston-engined aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
Her rebuild she emerges from her rebuild as basically an entirely new ship apart from the exterior hull plating. The Soviets quite literally take a hacksaw to her interior and gut her.
So basically, they haven't bowled with the existing ship at all. They've just gone, let's build something completely different.
Oh yeah, so they bother with the existing ship for her first completion. So when she enters Soviet service first, with that straight deck, they have still got some of her structure. But when they drag her in for a rebuild, they take one look at all the features and go, if for us to do what we want, we've got to, basically take a hatchet to her. And basically they decide to do that, basically on the sole grounds that the Red Fleet basically says, we are not confident we have enough carrier experience to justify the construction of a new carrier.
So
like
basically,
as expensive as this is going to be, even if it's going to be more expensive than a new ship, it's still not like I don't want to have us build a new carrier until we've tried operating a carrier with an angled flight deck and can build a new design that's what we want.
okay. So pretty much what they're doing is they are cutting down top weight by getting rid of the guns. You
Yep.
say they are gutting the entire internals of her, which I can understand.
For example, she keeps her temperamental German engines for her first tranche in Soviet service. Those go during the rebuild.
Let's be honest. We know from the American assessments of the German engines and a lot of the British assessments of the German engines, everything's perfect, they are brilliant engines. But the trouble is, everything has to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's one of those scenarios that you often get with a lot of the German stuff and a lot of the German equipment. That it's very well designed in terms of if it's working perfectly and it's got exactly it's got exactly all the materials and everyone's able to do the maintenance and things they wanted to do, it's great. If it's not, it's really not. So, again, air group. What are you thinking about for the air group for this aircraft? What were you thinking about in terms of its purpose? What is the carrier for example? What have the Soviets decided to push the carrier for? Are they just going straight down, we want the fleet carrier route? Are they looking at it as a strike carrier? Are they looking at it as an warfare carrier? Are they looking at it as a defensive bastion carrier? Is it going to be carrying torpedo bombers? Is it going to be carrying dive bombers? Is it going to be carrying rocket-propelled aircraft? Because let's be honest, Stalin's perception of what a carrier battle group and carrier air group should be was actually very much 1930s in its origin. Whenever you see his discussions, he's talking very, very old-fashioned thinking.
As completed, Graf Zeppelin has a very almost outdated air wing. Prior to her rebuild, she's an entirely piston-engined carrier,
Okay.
completely. Um,
So
she
basically, she's the
carries.
product of peaking obsolescence. If we're talking about the late 1940s, early 1950s, we're talking about when piston engines and turboprop aircraft were really reaching their peak, and they're really good aircraft, but they're also at the same time not what you want for a combat aircraft at that point because everything's moving to jet.
Exactly. And also, because of the way Graf Zeppelin is laid out, and the way she's constructed and the way the Soviets have finished her, the aircraft picked for her are the most reliable and easiest to maintain, as well as, most importantly, the easiest to fly and put down on the deck.
So they've been restricted by lift size for starters, but also
Yeah.
did they keep the hangar arrangement and organization system whereby they had the rails etc. to move aircraft around by, or have they
No, that
reversed it?
no, those are gone. No, those are gone. You'll notice if you look at the images that her catapults are also gone.
Yes, I did notice that, and I'm sort of looking at it going, well, I can understand to an extent getting rid of that, but that's also going to be a problem in other ways.
Oh, I
Especially
know.
if
This
she's operating in the Black Sea, etc., areas like that, I would probably want catapults because this is going to rely on me getting up to maximum speed all the time to be able to launch fully laden aircraft.
she Soviet carriers in the Red Fleet timeline never operate in the Black Sea.
Okay.
They Graf Zepplinski works up in the Baltic, and then she splits her time between her first rebuild in the Northern and Pacific fleets.
Okay.
Basically, the areas where she can get out the most, conduct flight operations, practice sortie, exercise the most.
All right.
Um, you're looking at, I think we went towards lags and LAs. So
Okay.
Lavochkins and lags for her fighter wing.
Yeah.
For her attackers, we weren't sure if we want to go for an IL-2 or IL-10 derivative. But we did decide that we would go for an IL derivative for her torpedo bomber role, and that she would not carry dive bombers.
Okay.
Basically, on the grounds that by the time she enters service, your dive bomber's not getting anywhere near the. It's not getting anywhere near its target before it releases its payload, basically.
So
And
pretty much you're pretty much looking for rocket, but but
yeah,
those are replaced dive bombers. That's as I've discussed on my channel quite a lot recently. The reason the Helldiver uh, two uh, the wartime World War II
yeah,
Helldiver rather than
another
the
one you
previous
mean?
Helldiver. The reason that one doesn't do as well and doesn't get sort of the glorious victory is it's designed as a dive bomber, and by the time it enters service, no one's really using dive bombers as dive bombs anymore. They're bomb trucks, and the Avenger
Yeah,
is a better bomb truck.
yeah, exactly. Um, and we also figured that if we went with an IL-10 naval, that we termed it the naval strike aircraft because it's a torpedo bomber and
Mm-hmm.
a close air support / ground attack aircraft all
Mm-hmm.
rolled into one, which is basically what you want for a carrier strike aircraft in this immediate post-war period.
Yes.
We also realised that the IL-10s, wide track undercarriage, very rugged, reliable. Like you can slam that thing down on a carrier and get Sergei with his bloody, with his screwdriver, and then like 20 minutes later, off you go. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but you get the point.
They are famously, how do I put this? Rudimentarily rugged.
Yeah,
In
because it's
that
important to remind that.
they're
Yeah,
easy
go
to
on.
maintain. There's some good examples of some of them which were, you know, in the Korean War. The example I often give is there's aircraft which were literally bombed in hangars, which were operational again within a couple of days.
Yeah, with her fighters,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't actually settle on an exact fighter. We basically just went with whatever tail dragger piston-engined aircraft the Russians had that had the widest tracked undercarriage, aka would be the easiest and most stable to land on Graf Zeppelin, basically.
Yes. Okay.
Because, again, in her original form, the Red Fleet are not looking at her as, oh, look at us, we've got a carrier, we're going to do carrier operation. No, we are here to run this ship ragged in exercises, flight training, crew rotation. We want to pump this ship for all the knowledge that we can.
Okay.
Basically.
It's all legitimate ideas.
And also train as many carrier aircrew as we can. Because with Stalin building the other things that we can't talk about as one component of the Red Fleet, the other component is going to be carriers. And you've also got Russian design bureaus working up jet aircraft for the carriers as well. But those aren't going to be. But again, because they're trying to build jet aircraft from scratch for carriers, their development takes a fair while. It's one of the reasons why she persists as one of the last straight-decked carriers in the world until about 1960. Okay. Because there's no reason to convert her, because there's no sufficiently reliable Russian jet aircraft that the Russians are happy putting on this carrier. And also, they're not happy with the idea. Also, they've got no bloody cats. They can't launch them off the bloody carrier anyway. They've got no cats.
No.
So
let's be honest too. They would have to do. It's going to be, and I'm looking at the picture, and every time I do bring up the picture for everyone to see, because I've got the picture of the two converted ships next to each other. I think it's the last picture you sent me through that I'm allowed to show. And it really does illustrate the difference in flak gun mounts and gun mounts, but also just looking at the shaping of the carrier's conversion. Honestly, I would say they've also done something to the bow and the forward portion of the ship, because if the island structure is still relatively where it is, that's had to be lengthened. I would argue. I would think from its picture.
Yeah, she was lengthened. Yeah, the casemates were removed, and they put in structural supports where the casemates were, and
so they could lengthen
this is what Sea Dodders has run by me, but yeah, basically, so they can lengthen it. Again, you see, close in the bow, and also that space where the magazines were for the 5.9-inch casemates is where some of the storage area for the steam for the two front-mounted cats are.
Okay.
You know, so like they build up pressure, like basically they store the pressure there. So that because they've replaced the steam plant, and part of the replacement was this whole they wanted a way to rapidly cycle the cats very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Because you'll notice that they also have a cat on the angled deck as well. Because one of the things is they want to be conducting as many flight ops as they can, get flight hours, basically keep sorting people off the carrier, get those carrier flight hours in, get those launches and landings in. Again, it fits into her role as the Red Fleet's basically training and first carrier, in essence.
It's also probably a good methodology to work out different sizes of aircraft, because, again, if you've got a waist catapult, normally you can use that if you want to. You can have alert fighters ready to go to forward catapults, and the waist catapult can be used for things like taking off and landing AWAC, airborne early warning aircraft and supply aircraft, while you keep the main cats free to surge aircraft. Main to surge your fighters. It's something you do.
Oh yeah, that was
when you've got a cap air defense scenario on. It's usually an advantage. I'd also say probably it's also I would say this vessel would still be serving us an experimental role even in its conversion, in that it's experimented on. It's the next generation of equipment. It's the equipment that they're going to put on the next
absolutely, completely.
Carriers. And it's probably its last
start. Oh, completely. You're absolutely right there.
A decade or so, I'd presume, when it comes out. Although, there again,
you'd think so, wouldn't you?
It's the Soviet fleet, so it'll probably never go. It'll never go.
Yeah, but like we'll get to that. So,
look, in a nice way, you have shown me your pre-dreadnought ideas, which have been converted into.
That's neither here nor there. That's. That's neither here nor
We
there.
had a discussion the other day about radars, and it got disturbing very quickly.
Yeah, but yeah, so to move now, so she's taken in hand, along with other vessels of the Red Fleet, for
Yes.
a massive upgrade program.
Yes.
Um, from just before 1960 to about 1963, 64, for a very, very obvious reason. Which basically boils down to spoilers. I don't want to think about what Nikita Khrushchev would have been tempted to do if he had large numbers of heavy service combatants and a carrier during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we took those away from him.
Well, yes, but I have a feeling, honestly, he'd have postured with them, but I don't think it would ultimately change the result. It could have been
But we
interesting.
didn't want to have to deal with but we didn't want to have to deal with that, so we just
the number of fighters, etc., which might have had some interesting conversations with each other. What was it? What's the one of the Tom Clancy books does have a scenario where a forger, I think it's the Red October, a forger aircraft flies low and slow to try and get close to the US carrier, and is basically pounced by two F-14s going, "We commend you on your ability to fly low and slow. How are you doing down there?" And it's got
that's very funny.
it's got two F-14s, one on either side, and it's got another two sitting up behind it, and the pilot's just going,
Here we go. We gotta get out of here. Let's go, boys. Let's not stick around.
yeah. It's the joy of airborne early warning, but there again, if you have the Soviets having an aircraft, a carrier there, and they have airborne early warning, how's that going to affect their approach to the blockade?
Absolutely.
It'd be a tremendously interesting effect on the Suez Crisis. Not on Suez Crisis, on the Suez Crisis as well, actually. I was just jumping out from the Cuban Crisis. But also, there's the Suez Crisis already in there, though. You have got the carriers around for the Suez Crisis, and let's be honest, the Soviets might have deployed them, which could have caused an interesting scenario, because it might have caused the Americans to think, oh, good lord, the Egyptians are being backed by the Soviets.
Well, to be fair, the Soviets and the Americans both backed the Egyptians basically equally. We fucked up so badly that both great powers went, "Stop what you're doing" at the same time in the same sort of voice.
Honestly, the idea the Americans didn't know what was going I find very laughable, considering how many of them are in UK watching bases and around British bases, and how
they knew what was going on. They knew what was going on.
I think it's one of those classic things of, if it had taken place, if it had happened quickly and NASA had fallen, then the Americans would have been very happy. It didn't happen as speedily as it could have done, and therefore things got bad, and so they decided to reverse their position. That's always been my strong suspicion.
Yeah, that's highly likely.
Because let's be honest, NASA's government was already worrying them about where it was pro and where it was keen on.
Yes.
It's it's the classic scenario of great power politics. If you win and win quickly,
yes,
we all agree and support you. If you don't win quickly, we all hate you.
Yep, pretty much. So this the carrier. So these two images are of Graf Zeppelin and her rebuilt form, as I'm sure Dr. Clarke is showing you. The one. So it's time to talk about her rebuilt form. So three cats. She's basically she's influenced a lot by British and American practice that the Soviets have been watching at this point. Elevators pretty much mostly redone. She gets a deck edge, if you notice.
Yes.
A deck edge elevator.
That might solve some of the problems with hangar space.
Yep. She keeps a slightly enlarged elevator next to the conning tower, but it is slightly enlarged to take larger aircraft, although the largest aircraft she carries do have to use the deck edge.
Has it been moved slightly
It's
across the
important to
deck
note
as
the IL.
well? Has it been moved slightly off the centre?
Yeah, it has.
And so she's
Yeah, it
gone
has,
from
to
3
clear
lifts
the...
to 2, and one of those is deck edge.
Yeah.
Because looking at the markings...
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking at the markings. It's a fun scenario. It's a fun thing.
In regards of Air-Wing, we did envisage some derivative of the IL-28, not as a combat aircraft, but as the Soviets' first attempt at some form of basically onboard delivery asset, in essence.
Okay.
To rapidly resupply the carrier with weapons and munitions. So something like basically it's not the IL-28 itself, but it's something around that size. You know, that it basically it lands. It doesn't do any maneuvering. It lands, it's offloaded, and then it catapults off all on that angled deck section. It doesn't go anywhere else on the carrier, and it's not based on the carrier. For her air wing, we looked around for a few alternatives, but there weren't really any alternative jet aircraft we really were happy with. And I think we are just going to go with some form of navalized MiG-15 or MiG-17.
That's probably about sensible. MiG-17 is
basically
probably better timeline-wise, but MiG-15 might be more reliable to go with for something which is actually going to deal with some of the issues of saltwater operation. Because that's the other thing you have to think about with all these ships. They have to be, on all the aircraft, they have to be saltwater proof. They really do have to be designed to deal with salt water.
It's one of the reasons why we're leaning towards a MiG-15. Basically because of the MiG-15 or a MiG-15 derivative, because it would allow enough time for a version of that aircraft that is, if not cold soak capable, at the very least cold spray capable. Just because of how proven the platform would be, how well known and the engine would be, you know, that principle there.
And there are honestly, thinking about the size of aircraft factor, because people probably be wondering about this one in terms of air group size in its operation, reducing from 3 lifts, which are all centerline, to 1 centerline lift and 1 deck edge lift, is probably going to free up, and adding on possibly some hangar enlargement vis-a-vis the enlarged forward bow space. You probably are looking at an air group growth, despite the size of the air group growing, the size of the aircraft growing.
Yeah,
you're probably looking
we
at
haven't decided.
It won't be a massive growth, but it probably will be some growth because you think about it. The main trouble with centerline lifts, when you're talking about hangar design, and the British are greatest, the illustrious class are a classic examples. The British put them actually at the ends of the hangar. Why? Because it means you only have to have one dead area, that bit of portion in front of the enforced lifts when they come down, or you know, either forward or aft, depending on whether it's the forward or aft lift. But the thing is, if you have a centerline lift in the center of your hangar, you have to not only be worried about the space the airlift occupies, you have to be worried about the space around the lift that it occupies, and access for it, and safety of where you're putting things, because let's put it this way, if the lift comes down and your aircraft's wingtip is just there, you've got a problem that can get damaged. Or if there's anything in that area, and people go, well, you know, if we just need it's just a line and it's that solid core area, you always have to leave a safety margin because things can move. Even on the wonderful rails and control system which the Graf Zeppelin was designed for, and if you're not using that system, it's still especially true, there are still issues with aircraft maybe moving and you getting caught in lifts, so you need to leave space. So centerline lifts can really hog up space. So if you've got rid of them, and you've reduced down, and you've moved one slightly off the center line, the other one that remains, you've probably given yourself a lot more space in your hangar for operations and support of aircraft.
Just another point. One of the things that we've decided on, and that just seems to make sense, is that the Red Fleet, with this rebuild, decides to adopt a single aircraft policy. As in, they will have an aircraft that will serve as fleet defense. It will serve as naval strike. It will serve as basically they're trying to squeeze as much economy of scale out of their carrier program as they can
Okay, that sounds
to
good.
try and get as much out of the state as they can. Now, there are a few occasions where
that's also very sensible
doesn't
from your air
work.
group size. That's also very sensible from your air group size. Because
Yeah,
in terms of force generation, if you want to generate extra cap aircraft, if they're all the same aircraft, you have a lot more spare aircraft to do that with.
yeah. So this is the like you see this with her air group after her rebuild. It's all of her combat fixed wing aircraft are MiG-15s.
Mhm.
And her only other combat loaded aircraft are her Ka-25 anti-submarine helicopters,
Okay.
because those exist. The Ka-25 comes into service in 1958, and of course a carrier is going to carry SW assets.
Yeah.
And there's also another reason for why the Ka-25s come in, that's
Strangely
again
enough,
spoilers. Not going to go into that.
You don't have flight deck markings for the helicopters designs.
You'll notice that some of the designs do.
Okay.
Not all, but some of them do.
Some do, some don't. The one I have in front of me doesn't. I was sort of going, hang on, if it's got helicopters,
if you look
it
at
needs
the
flight deck design.
You can see where that changes. If you look at if you look at the number 10 carrier, the one that comes immediately after Kuznetsov in the mid 60s, as a sort of half sister and companion.
I'm not allowed to display that image.
Oh no, you're not allowed to show it, but it's just for comparison.
I can
and if you
see
look
it,
at the
but
other
I can't
carriers
display
around,
it to the people viewing the video. It's
Yeah.
cruelty.
I know, because that would be too many spoilers, especially that ship in the middle. That would be too many spoilers. But so as the decades go on, you basically see the Mikoyan Design Bureau basically dominate Soviet carrier aviation.
Okay.
In terms of the multi-role fighters. Oh, and multi-role is the key word here. They are the fighters. They are the assets that do long-range interdiction. They are the assets that... There are exceptions to this in the late 60s to early 70s. There was a brief period where the Red Fleet operates a dedicated naval strike aircraft. But as... it starts with Graf Zeppelin. She has a homogeneous air group.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a period where the Red Fleet operates a multi-role aircraft and a dedicated naval strike aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
Then, as aircraft development increases and they improve again, then you go back to the Red Fleet operating a purely homogeneous fixed-wing aircraft again, and in about the mid to late 70s.
Okay.
Graf Zeppelin tests but does not operate the first AWACS platforms for the Red Fleet. At least she doesn't operate them at first until her half-sister comes into the fleet, and then she gets them when her half-sister gets them as well. We don't have a design for these. A lot of aircraft we don't have designs for, as there were no direct Soviet equivalents constructed. And none of us are aviation engineers, so we don't really know what form or designation they would have taken, or what design bureau they would have come from. So if we are unclear or don't have some reference point... So for some aircraft, we do have ideas of what they might be. So the MiG-15s, for example. And later on, the MiG-23Ks. That were real aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So we have reference points for them. But for some things like the hypothetical naval strike aircraft or the hypothetical AWACS aircraft of multiple generations across the Red Fleet, we don't have designs or designations for them. So they'll be referred to as Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, Red Fleet, AWACS, etc. Until... And of course, probably when the Ramblings goes out and we're discussing it, we'll no doubt get people bringing in suggestions, so look out for that. And if you would have any ideas, please do let me know.
Well, I was just thinking, actually, considering for the airborne early warning, and if you consider its contemporaries in the airborne early warning role, etc., and what aircraft then took over it, I'd be tempted by the Ferret Ganetsky in that sense, because one of the things
Hmm.
you have to remember is that the Soviets did have a lot of interest in the work of Fairy and
Hmm.
their development, and that would sort of fit with the sort of the period. But also, 1960s, you do have the Hawkeye, so something sort of
Yeah, we were
like that. I'd say,
we were definitely leaning on something turboprop driven for the
yeah,
airborne early warning for the
it
Red
does
Fleet.
make sense for that
Con-
period. I'm just,
yeah, contra rotating prop
yeah.
forwards.
I would be tempted, but if I was the Soviets, especially with their operating scenario and their worry about ice build up, especially on their things. And wait, I'd be tempted by a Ganetsky, but Hawkeye. If you're talking late 1950s, early 1960s, it's going to depend exactly. If they're doing it post 1960, they're going to be copying the Americans. If they're doing it pre 1960, well, the American equivalent at that point is, roughly speaking, the Sky Raider. The British equivalent at that point is the Gannet. And so I'd reckon something along those lines is what they're going to be working with.
Um, what we're thinking of something that straddles the line. So basically, the Soviets are considering airborne early warning in the early to mid '60s. So they
Mm-hmm.
trial various different concepts,
Yeah.
and there's a few production runs of aircraft that see service during that period. So like they start out with one or two Ganetskis to see how they do, and then they see the Sentry come on. Let's have a look at that, and let's try something like that, and then they get trialed, and then there's pros and cons to both aircraft, and there's a brief period in like 63 to 66 where both types are being evaluated side by side, and then as you get towards the late 60s, early 70s, you see the Ganetsky derivatives fall out of favor
And
and the what we would recognize as traditional airborne early warning aircraft take
before
over.
anyone starts shouting at this video, I know I didn't mention the E1 Tracer, but for anyone who's ever seen pictures of the E1 Tracer, you'll understand why I didn't mention it. It's a lovely aircraft in so many ways, but I'm just finding a picture to show everyone. I will add it to the screen and put up a picture. Uh, and Paul, I'll send it to Fleet first because I really should send him send him the picture first, so he gets to see this image of this wonderful aircraft. But there is a reason why I'm suggesting that no one deserves to have that in their life. Um,
Yes, quite. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting.
it's an interesting aircraft, and it doesn't at all look like someone has had a bad perm. It doesn't at all look like a very bad haircut on an aircraft, does it?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure no one. So the reason I was going with the Gannet, Sky Raider, and then the Hawkeye is because this aircraft had issues, and whilst the Soviets might go there, a Soviet tracer would just.
It's also very bad in terms of storability.
Yes, and it's really designed to take advantage of the American space on their carriers in their spacings, rather than the British and the Soviet scenarios. And the British and
And we're
in that
not
scenario,
there. Like
the British
the Soviets,
scenario is closer to that in many ways.
yeah. Um, the Soviet carriers will get there in terms of size, but we're not there yet.
No,
Like the Soviets will catch up in terms of carrier size, and will for a brief period overtake the RN, but they're not there yet.
no, and uh, you're talking about something especially in terms of the tracer. It's well, how do I put it politely? The Hawkeye has a hangar height, and I'm going from memory here, so please bear with me. In fact, I won't go from memory. I will check it up. I will check it up. Let me go find my notes. Has a height of 18 foot, 3 3/4 inches, but its radome can retract by 2 feet, so down to 17 foot 6 inches. The E1 Tracer, its height was technically supposed to 16 foot 10 inches, and that's one of the reasons why it's the shape it is. I would not like to take that through a hangar and a ship which has as many reworks as the Graf Zepplinski will have had at this point, because that flight deck has gone from having to deal with the landing of things like Storks and Stukas that it was originally designed for, to having heavy jet aircraft landing on it. If it doesn't have reinforcements underneath every single hangar plate, under every single deck plate, flight deck plate, then I'm worried for it.
Oh, it does. It does. Like, one of the things that Kuznetsov has to deal with throughout her service life is, especially as it goes on, although this is remedied a little bit in her first major rebuild, this sort of,
Do you
like,
mean Graf
extends
Zepplinski
the
rather than
problem.
Kuznetsov? Just checking, because
whoops.
you could be talking about Kuznetsov as well.
No, I'm not talking about Kuznetsov. Sorry. The thing that Graf Zepplinski has to deal with, or Vladimir Lenin as she's actually known in the Red Fleet, has to deal with is hangar height problems. Those don't really become a thing until the late 60s, when her MiG-15s are traded in for other aircraft. And while while the ability for aircraft to take their height down is worked into some of the Soviet aircraft that come out later, especially in the period where she's still considered a frontline warship, that is up until about the mid-70s. And the reason it's till the mid-70s is, well, spoilers, I can't say why, but something happens in the mid-70s that means that Graf Zeppelin is no longer considered a frontline Russian carrier. But until that point, the aircraft designers are willing to make compromises, because at that point the Red Fleet only has 2 carriers, so it needs to have its aircraft operable on both of them. But beyond that point, things change. But yeah, it's something that her half-sister doesn't have to deal with as a new build that's slightly bigger. She doesn't have the same problems. But Graf Zepplinski has to deal with. It's important that when I say half sister, I don't want to mean that she's based on Graf Zeppelin's design, because she isn't. It's just that she's of a similar size.
She's made to similar operating requirements and patterns, not design.
Yeah.
It's one of those circumstances where you find things which look on the surface very similar to each other because they are built to a similar requirement. But once you go beneath the surface, you find they're incredibly different.
Indeed.
It's always fun the way that works out. So,
the thing now that we've got through...
We've got to the initial jet age. How far forward are you bringing this vessel? How many transitions of aircraft are you taking it through?
Well, Graf Zeppelin survives through to the end of the timeline in some form of notional service, and is reactivated for a certain event that takes place at the end of the timeline as an active carrier.
Okay. Can I just ask this question? Is the end of the timeline 1993-4?
It's 1990... Well, the end of the planned locked-in-place timeline is 1991.
Okay.
Very specifically. Because beyond that, it will require the entire panel to discuss beyond that point.
Because I just had visions of you saying it was reactivated in, I don't know, 2023 to assist with ongoing operations, and...
No one
be that cruel.
No, she's reactivated for the last time in 1991.
Oh, good.
Although, to be fair, it's not reactivated, it's taken out of the reserves. Which, bear in mind, she only entered in the early 80s.
So she basically entered ordinary. in
Yes.
the 80s, in the sort of 1983 sort of scenario, and then
81.
81, and is commissioned again in 1990.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be a fun job, because where was she stored in Ordinary?
From what I believe, let me think. She's stored. Because one of the things that happens in the Red Fleet timeline is that the canal network between the Northern Fleet and the Baltic, that one that the Russians have, that they can move some ships down.
Yes.
There's a fair bit of investment in that, and there are a few freshwater anchorages set up to put ships into Ordinary away from salt. So that's where she is.
So actually making an advantage of the size and scale of the Soviet Union, rather than it becoming a disadvantage where you have basically separate fleets.
Indeed.
And also
There are
allowing you to basically fuse the Northern and Baltic fleets from a logistical perspective, which really would will really strengthen them.
Indeed, and this is all brought about by the expansion of the Red Fleet, making the prohibitive cost of the expansion of those canals worthwhile. In a way that wasn't the case until fairly the end of the Soviet Union in our timeline.
And the question I'm going to ask, next question is, do they try and work on expanding those canals further?
What do you mean? They don't.
Trying to extend them south.
They don't expand the locks and dredge the rivers that lead to the Black Sea. The Black Sea is still corvette access only. Basically down to the prohibitive cost. The Red Fleet got told it's either, we'll give you the Northern Baltic link, but if you want the Black Sea link, say goodbye to the rest of your building program for other things. And so the Red Fleet shut up.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this.
But strategically, that would be so fun.
Oh, completely. I will say this, however, in terms of...
And economically, it'd be kind of useful, because if you can move an aircraft carrier, think about the size of ships you can move.
Very true.
And I can imagine the cruise ships industry trying to take advantage of those locks.
True as well. The possible... what was I going to say?
Cruise through Russia. Sorry, I do admit I'm just interrupting Fleet at this moment just to sort of to wind them up the cruise ships, but also it's a fun thing to think about. Cruising through Russia.
Yes, it is actually rather interesting. The Red Fleet, just to very quickly before I open to basically quickfire questions from Clarke. Oh, that's quite punchy. I like that. Put that on a title card somewhere. Yeah, that's quite punchy there. Yeah. I just would like to say one last little thing. The Red Fleet basically is looking at carriers from its... Because it's got a bunch of surface assets, about 6 of them to be precise, that are modern, fast, and available. 4 with the Northern Fleet, and 2 with the Pacific Fleet.
Mm-hmm.
And it only has, by the mid-60s, 2 carriers. So it looks to take in hand and upgrade... it looks to expand its carrier fleet. And by the mid to late 70s, that has been completed. And that's all I'll say for now. If you want to learn more, you'll have to come and tune in for the full timeline live stream. But now...
Which could last for about 4 or 5 hours, whereas this will probably be a maximum of an hour and a half, because, I am taking over Fleet's evening.
Yeah, it's fine. I've got no other commitments on my time.
Neither do I, actually, at the moment. It's either this or pack boxes, and frankly, I have... Again, the viewers don't really need to notice, it's extra context, but I've already had 3 book avalanches today on me. I am surprised I'm still alive. The amount of books which fell on me from one shelf, it was just...
Good lord.
To be fair, I was balancing on boxes of books at the time.
Yeah.
To reach other books.
Take care of yourself, for goodness sake. Anyway, so
I will open... I'm made of rubber.
What I will do now is, given everything we've discussed, I'm going to open to Dr. Clarke to basically bombard me with any questions or thoughts he's had while we've been talking that I haven't covered, and try to keep it from being too spoiler-filled, if possible.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to ask is, how do they keep the engines operating? Because the Americans tried this with, of course, with the cruiser they had post World War II, and that basically was such a nightmare they ended up nuking it. That
Oh,
was literally because despite their knowledge of high pressure engines and trying to work them, they had a real problem. A, getting spares. B, figuring out and making it work, and C, keeping it working because it was so finicky. How do they get any experience with a carrier with those engines, especially considering the experience she's had and those engines hadn't been probably run in?
well, they see there's a lot of ex-Kriegsmarine sailors that have worked on high pressure engines in Germany after the war, and a lot of them get knocks on their door in the late 40s, and there's a very nice NKVD agent standing there,
Ah,
and they say, "Congratulations, you're now a Russian citizen. Come with me." And they're, for lack of a better term, press ganged into the Navy. Bearing in mind this does only last until the rebuild when those troublesome engines are torn out and replaced.
mm-hmm.
As in regards for spares,
But
you have basically the same thing. The East German government is persuaded to run a plant providing spares for Graf Zeppelin. Note, I use the word persuaded there.
okay, but the trouble is with that is that's going to sap up key people in certain ways. You're going to need NKVD personnel aboard a ship to keep an eye on them because they're basically prisoners. Or rather, the Red Fleet is going to have its own personnel aboard to keep an eye on them, and the NKVD probably won't trust them, so you probably have both the Red Fleet personnel and the NKVD. And also, you have your own problem in that how are they working alongside Russian engineers? Because you're going to be having to train up your own crews to with the experience, and also getting the experience of operating carrier engines and engines, etc., and getting the experience of how you manage it, especially steam generation. And I know originally she doesn't have steam catapults. Of course, she has hydraulic catapults. And do they go with the hydraulic? You told me already they get rid of the catapult system, but what happens to the hydraulic system? They just rip it out entirely when they're first using it.
It's part of the reason why the rebuild takes so long.
Ripping it out, ripping out all the plumbing.
Yeah, as in the first actual build to get her into service takes so long. Because they are basically, right, we can't get rid of the engines, that's the only annoying niggly thing we can't get rid of. Everything else,
we can get rid of.
Yes.
So basically she's a hull and engines.
Yes.
Which is when I next have to ask the question of, why does her superstructure stay so similar then if you're removing everything else? Because you're going to have removed everything else.
Oh,
why
her superstructure
has stayed so similar.
Because well, it's both similar at the same time in that the design calculations have already been done, but they have removed some of the more egregious superstructure work, and the funnel is smaller. Basically, it was simplicity. They've already got a superstructure that mostly functions.
Mm-hmm.
So cut it down a bit, change it, and then when we finish building the ship, we'll crane it back on. Easy. Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Basically.
Yeah, but the problem is that superstructure is designed around the German envisaged way of operating and where exactly their crews are going to be readying in the spaces. So that's going to define a lot of the operating capacity of the carrier. You know, one of the things I often get into with people is when you're looking at the design of carriers, where do they put the aircrew briefing rooms? Where are they situated vis-a-vis the command staff? The British tend to have slightly larger islands because they tend to put the briefing rooms in the island structure as part of that, and so they can rapidly get onto deck and those things. The Americans tend to stick the briefing rooms further down in the hull, which is why they tend to get away with smaller island structures. Not always, and I know there are spaces in the islands, and there are British spaces below decks as well. But in terms of their general operating emphasis, that's sort of where they're going. When you're dealing with the Reichsmarines carrier, when you're dealing with the Graf Zeppelin, well, that's designed around the Luftwaffe's idea of how to get aircraft ready. How's that affect the Soviets? Because their systems were different. Their plans they would tend to do their briefings far more separately because they tended to break up far more the links between the ground stations, and the air groups. Now, on a carrier, they might be fusing this more, but
It's
are they
important
still going to want a separate
to.
spaces, or are they going to combine them?
Um, we've not. To be honest with you, that's not something I've given a lot of thought to.
Because that's going to affect
But
the
what I
integration of the air group and how it operates with the fleet.
True, but what I will say is that the Soviet Navy is very determined. These are Soviet naval aircraft. They are not crewed by Soviet Air Force personnel. This is
Yes.
the Soviet
Well,
Naval Air Wing, which is
that's
something
completely
that the
understandable.
Soviet Navy, yeah, which is something the Soviet Navy's never really had before. They've not really had access to, you know, like yeah, there have been some naval air wings, but they've usually been twin-engined bomber aircraft and things of that nature, or maritime patrol aircraft. They've not really had single-engined fighter and naval strike aircraft.
It's well, the Russians have had naval aviation forces since 1912, and the Soviet ones, I realise, are more a product of the 1930s when they sort of they have them in the 1920s, but the Soviet force, as we more appreciate it today, was really started in the 1930s. Um,
Good point. I
they're
suppose.
quite, if we're talking about during World War Two, well, at the beginning of World War Two, they had the Pacific Fleet doesn't have only has a couple of aircraft. I think it's somewhere of nearly 1,500 aircraft from memory.
Hmm, that's a point.
So they are
I
quite a
think
massive formation. The
true.
Soviet naval aviation it's got a lot of personnel in there, a lot of people with a lot of history of aviation
Well,
operations.
I suppose.
And that's going to affect their approach to design because, let's be honest, the RNAS's operations and focus on designs affected how the Royal Navy initially designed their carriers in World War One. Then the fact that the Royal Air Force is formed and the Air Ministries, how they changed the Fleet Air Arm, then affects the carrier designs in the 1920s. And then you eventually have the resurgence of the Royal Naval, the Fleet Air Arm as part of the Navy in 1939, and that then leads to the next generation of carrier designs, which of course were never realised because Maltas were never completed historically. But that
Yes, the Maltas
changes
were
all
never
these things.
completed. Historically, yes, the Maltas were
So
never
again,
completed historically.
I'm wondering how has this affected Soviet development and how have they integrated this?
To tell you the truth, none of us are really experts on that and hadn't really considered it. If you want the honest answer,
Because
um,
okay, well then I'll say it's one of something I'm giving you to think about because one of the things that comes up in that scenario is how does the staff integrate with the pilots? Are the staff getting are the staff having to go to meet the pilots? Are the pilots having to go to discuss things with the admiral's staff, or are they located close enough that they are meeting each other on a regular basis while they're wandering through?
from what I can see of the superstructure that Sea Dollars has built, there are very prominent like series of rooms underneath. You can see where the main bridge
Yes,
is, and then you can see there's a bunch of rooms, and then there's two doors leading out onto the flight deck.
yes.
I would assume that, given how the ship's laid out, and that's unfortunately locked in as the design for Graf Zepplinski, and that kind of influences Soviet carriers moving forwards. I would assume that you'd have the pilot's quarters would be below deck.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have a mix of
Please tell me they're
naval
not
and
like the
other
burn and
stuff.
are not all forward underneath the flight deck.
No, no.
Oh, good.
Where they are is I don't know exactly. But the way that I would imagine that you do things is that if for briefings the aircrew would come up into the island, they'd be briefed,
So,
and then
that's
they'd
going to be
dash out those two doors.
their
Yeah.
briefing ready space. So again, you're designing a system where the aircraft are they going to are they going to be turned on, engines turned over in the hangar, or are they turned on the flight deck? Is it going to be a ready
Um,
operations aircraft a la the Royal Navy style or the American style?
Judging by the lack of a, although I suppose you can do in her original configuration, you can't warm up aircraft in the hangar.
No.
She's not open. On the rebuild form, if the deck edge elevator is down, you can do some limited warming up of the aircraft, and of course, the switch to jets does make that easier, as
Mm-hmm.
it's far easier to cold start a jet aircraft than it is a piston engine aircraft.
True.
Um, but ideally, I think the plan would be that you would have the strike package had been prepped and ready to go. The ground crew would have most of, as in the first flight of aircraft, like 4 to 6, would be ready to go. Like either on the cats or near the cats, or basically in a position where the pilots can mount them very easily.
So that means you're going to have fitters, you're going to have a deck crew, and you're going to have pilots having to have ready spaces in the island structure so they can get those aircraft rolling very quickly should they need to for the cap to reinsert the cap and the combat.
I mean,
combat air patrol.
It would explain why the island is a fairly long structure, and you've got the 2 levels. That would actually enable that to be quite easily done, and also below decks as well. You can also, like on the starboard side, that can also go down into the ship as well, and that would be fairly easy to have. Like that could all be handled fairly easily. Anything else?
I'm not trying to torture you here. I'm just trying to ask sort of questions.
Oh no! It's good to have holes poked so I can then patch them.
That's good. Well, the main thing I'm now thinking about, is if you're having this as your carrier and you've got the Sovietsky Soyuz, what's the principal escort scenario? What's the task group size? What are they sort of integrating in the scenario?
Oh,
are they building up a task group around a carrier and a capital ship operating together? The carriers operating separately with cruisers and destroyers, or is the carrier an add-on to a battleship-focused task group, or is it a joint-focused task group, or is battleship an add-on to the carrier-focused task group?
Soviet doctrine evolves in the following way. Actually, before I answer that question, can I get a quick 2-minute sabbatical, and then I'll be right back.
Okay.
And then I will answer that question in detail. Soviet doctrine in the Red Fleet timeline evolves thusly. You have 2 concepts for the Red Fleet.
Small question. Did you use that 2 minutes to literally dash into a room and get something you've printed out as a copy of this?
No, I did not. This is all from memory.
All from memory.
And my memory's quite good on this. The Soviet Red Fleet evolves 2 doctrines. There is the Joint Action Group, which is a carrier and a capital ship, and then there is the Surface Action Group, which is a capital ship alone, with no carrier. You will never see Soviet carriers operate without a heavy unit in support.
Alright.
But that will never be the Sovietsky Soyuz. She will never operate with a carrier in the entire timeline.
She's not fast enough?
Yeah, she's not fast enough. All Soviet action groups that operate outside of the Baltic and Black Sea have to be able to break 30 knots. That's another doctrinal thing. If they're pushed, they have to be able to break that speed.
That's their extraction speed?
Yes. That's the lower limit of their extraction speed. And Sovietsky Soyuz cannot do that. She operates outside of the Black Sea and Baltic for the first few years after her completion, but after about 1962, she never leaves the Baltic again. The vessels that operate with the carriers for most of their existence are the Soviet cruiser formations as screen, along with Soviet destroyers, and the heavy units are, they're heavy units that we have not yet named in this discussion, but I will now name. Spoilers, the Stalingrads are the heavy units that work with Russian carriers.
Okay.
Their high speed makes them ideal for it.
What about the Sverdlov class?
The what?
The Sverdlov.
Oh, Sverdlovs.
Yes.
Oh, the Sverdlovs are screen.
Yeah.
They're not considered heavy enough to act as heavy unit escorts for Russian carriers.
At 13,600 tons in standard and with top speed of 32.5 knots, 12 6-inch guns, I can understand that, but those are some gorgeous ships. I do love the Sverdlovs. Anyone who's viewed
they're lovely, and you will see Sverdlovs and other Russian cruisers of similar type, because remember, the Sverdlovs were just the last of of a long generation of 12 6-inch armed cruisers that the Russians built. They are always to be found with Russian carriers and Russian SAGs, service action groups, as well. Usually as the heavy escorts in the early part of the Red Fleet period, and even as the Red Fleet timeline goes on, you'll still see them basically bulking up the escort numbers, as it were. You don't really see. Indeed. Although the primary heavy lifting work of the escort goes on to more modern missile frigates, destroyers, and missile cruisers as the period goes on.
Okay.
Although the role of escorting heavy unit will usually be found to be a Stalingrad, either in original form or one of their rebuilt forms.
Okay, that's now making me think. Rebuilt Stalingrad?
Indeed,
So
but that's a
basically,
spoiler.
you added missiles, didn't you? You don't have to tell me which missiles. You just added missiles, didn't you?
Yes, we did, and something else that we changed as well. But that's too many spoilers.
This is going to be an interesting long video when it comes out. But,
Yes.
it's going to be
Anything?
very interesting. I am just, actually, I have to say, for people's delectation, there is a picture of actually Sveldov herself, gone up on the screen for everyone to see. And to see that the Russians do have a very fine eye for ship design this period.
Indeed, they do.
One of the
I
things
mean,
that's often forgotten about is that.
since I named dropped them, I can show them off if I can find the most up to date version of them.
They are,
That's the.
While
Where?
Fleet's looking for that, one of the things I should elaborate on with the Soviet design heritage is that they buy a lot from the Italians, and they also buy some stuff from the Germans, and they are very happy to go around copying ideas from other people to bring them in and fuse them together. So what you often get is Italian flair and sort of design, and often Italian internals on their ships. They often have very much Italian-inspired internals in terms of engines and layouts. With what I call a German-style Nordic covering because of operating in the icy structures. So often when you look at their hull lines and hull flow, it's far more Italian-esque. You look at them sort of go, that's a very Italian-esque, Italian design heritage flow being put onto that hull shaping, which does produce some very interesting operating characteristics. The Sveldovs, when they were being watched by allies, were often a case of, oh, these are capable ships. These are truly capable ships. And that caused a lot of allies to worry about them. And some interesting scenarios with a gentleman called Crab. But we'll leave that to one side in another video.
Indeed. Where? Fleet's having a moment.
I have to say, you have been a very good sport being the first time doing this, because the sound could end up being terrible. All things could be terrible, and you've very kindly done this.
It'll be fine.
So, one of the things I will say for people, please do comment below whether the sounds worked and whether you like these sort of things.
Am I quiet? Am I loud? I gotta know.
How do the things go? Because if it does work, I've already said that later in the year I'm hoping to do a discussion with Drac about aircraft carriers, and there's a few other people I'd like to bring on, and there's a few other people who've been bugging me going, I'd love to come on your channel, and I'm going... I'm in the middle of moving, so doing this right now is worrying the life out of me because I've got enough things I'm juggling without adding this onto it. But B, is it going to work?
Where? Come on. It's got to be here somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so have you got any questions while I'm just looking through for a thing that I'm looking for?
The main thing I was sort of wondering is, to what extent is Graf Zepplinski, etc., and Assista, are they designed to act as, how do I put this politely, oilers for their escorts? Have the Soviets pushed that idea of them, or have they pushed their own range of logistics vessels, and how do they model that, how do they grow that to support them?
From what I'm aware, the Soviets have not gone with at least not their first two generations of carriers as oilers.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At all.
It makes sense. But it was also something which was quite common even in World War II, that the larger carriers and the larger battleships would often act as oilers for their escorts, so they would take on fuel from from maybe a fleet oiler and fill up, and then they'd fill up their escorts from them.
That might be something we see the Soviets adopt doctrinally, but I can't I don't know enough to comment on it. But what I do have and have now found, where have you put it?
I'm guessing this is going to be a picture of Stalingrad.
Indeed. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble finding her.
In her unmodernized form that you're allowed to show with people before your big reveal?
Yes, unfortunately. Actually, hang on. Unless I've been very, very smart with myself and I'm forgetting it, which I may have been.
We always try to hope we're smart with ourselves.
Don't we just? Nope, that's not what I want. Come on, Fleet. Don't let yourself down.
He'll get there, don't worry.
Anyway, quick, ask me another question. Ask me another question so we keep things going while we're waiting.
I was enjoying. But, no, I would say one of the other things I'd wonder sort of with an aircraft carrier and the helicopter testing is, at what point would they at any point consider turning her into a landing ship helicopter? You know, an LHP, a landing ship helicopter, a helicopter platform. Using her in that role, like Albion and Bulwark were converted by the British. You know, would they have converted Graf Zepplinski rather than turning her into a jet carrier? Would they have preferred to convert her instead to a helicopter assault ship? Especially post-Suez, because let's be honest, the Americans and the Soviets, both post-Suez, look at how the British had done the operation in the Suez and went, "Oh my, that's interesting," because the British basically took their helicopter lessons of Malaya and applied them to their aircraft carriers, and then the assault in Suez. Some of the things which do go well in Suez are the British helicopter assaults, which take pretty much everyone by surprise how well they go. They even catch out the British. The British are expecting them to be, you know, in severe trouble at several points, and they just go, that worked. And the Royal Marines are very happy. So would the Soviets at any point consider that, do you think, in this scenario? Rather than going the route you've gone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think her last major... Oh, sorry, have I gone?
No, you're still there.
Hang on. Testing. Am I coming through all right?
I can still hear you perfectly. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. So if I remember correctly, your question was about converting a
converting her into a helicopter.
Converting her.
Basically.
Yeah, that's probably likely. Probably because, especially in her later years, basically because as it goes on, she basically gets more and more incapable of operating
the bigger jets.
Basically, yeah. So there comes a point when the Russians have to bite the bullet and accept that they can no longer use her to operate their best aircraft, and she becomes a helicopter, a mostly helicopter carrier. Although there are still fixed wing aircraft that will operate from her.
Is it like the Americans going, well, we can maybe operate a Tucano from something?
A little, but there are aircraft that were built historically that we now need a reason to exist.
I.e. Forgers.
Yes. Yak 38s, exactly.
Why? Why do you want to make the Yak 38 Forger exist?
Well, for one thing, it's a VTOL aircraft that we can use for close air support operations and point defense. And two, it's a VTOL aircraft.
You can use the Yak 38 Forger for that?
Well, can it carry infrared missiles? If answer yes, then we can throw it at things.
To an extent, yeah. Let's put it this way. The Yak-38 is another of those classic examples of an aircraft which has a lot of promise and a lot of potential and a lot of stuff on paper. And then you look at its actual operation and you look at the quality control issues they have with some of its components. And the aircraft never gets to live up to what it could have been.
Oh, completely. I don't deny that. That's very true. But we do have reasons for it existing. Come on, show me the money.
He's still searching for that Stalingrad picture.
I've got it. And the thing is, you could show this rebuilt version because it's not the one that will actually be seen, and it also includes the original version, so you could show this.
Yes.
Since the new rebuilt version is much improved, but the original version is unchanged.
Okay.
The Red Fleet Stalingrads, including one key feature.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you can see what the other thing is that I was talking about.
Yes. I'm going to point it out once I've got it in supersize, though. That's
Yes. Yes, indeed. They weren't using that rear turret anyway.
No, they weren't, but that will add to a lot of capabilities.
Indeed, it means that when they're operating as the central part of a surface action group, they can provide helicopter ASW cover for the entire task force.
And you
means...
you don't mind me displaying this picture?
Oh no, not at all.
That's good.
And it also means that I am pleased to announce that the Red Fleet timeline has no Moskvas.
There is
the Soviet Navy never builds them.
Oh, that's good, but there is one small problem. There is one small problem.
Go on.
You have tigered my Stalingrad.
It looks good, though, that's the difference!
No, it doesn't! It's still got an ugly box on the back!
It's a very well-shaped box.
It's not! It's massive!
It's not! It's acceptable!
Look at it compared to the rest of the superstructure, which is all thin and sleek. You have tigered up my Stalingrads!
It's fine. It's acceptable. It's beautiful. And in fact, I will make you feel better.
It's a monstrosity!
It's not! It's fine!
We are talking about the people who like to put lifts on things. Surely they'd have something lower, which maybe would wrap into the section in front of where those missiles are, and instead would have a sort of a slightly more raised deck, but would have a hangar down below, so it would look like it was a nice sort of structure and fairing, rather than something which is this massive, great big thing. Tower block stuck on the back of my Stalingrad.
It's alright. It's alright. It's alright. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah, like I said, it's fine. Allow me to soothe your pain. You can't show this one, but I can soothe your pain. The top one is the rebuilt Stalingrad as it currently is. Happier?
That's better, but again...
The hangar's under the flight deck now.
That does fit, but... That's...
Can you stop? Is that better, Dr. Clarke? Are you not going to lose your marbles now?
I wasn't losing my marbles earlier, but I have to say, I'm slightly worried about the exact level of marbles and their placement of some of the people making the design decisions.
Oh, that's $C. I just said go make this, and this is what he came back with.
Okay.
I like them, though.
I'm looking forward to the long video. I always say that.
We've got a lot of stuff to cover, and a lot of things that you haven't seen yet.
I suppose the freshwater ports to park things in and do probably a lot of the maintenance and a lot of the long-term refits, and the freshwater spaces to put them in internally are one of the reasons why hull life can last as long as it does in this particular scenario, because
Basically, yeah. Like, if
Otherwise,
something's in ordinary, it's in freshwater ordinary.
okay.
Like, for example, it's the same reason why the USN is so good at keeping things in ordinary. Because they have freshwater anchorages they can do it in.
Hmm. It does help. And it's what the British used to use Chatham, etc. for.
Yeah, same thing here. There are some ships that don't quite have this get out of jail free card and have to be instead heavily rebuilt by the powers that operate them. But that's, again, that's a bit too much spoileriness.
Okay.
Right, so I will ask again. Anything else, Dr. Clarke?
I think I'll be nice and let you save it there. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you enjoyed being here. I hope you found it fun.
I have thoroughly enjoyed being here. What a great way to get this whole thing started.
I hope everyone's enjoyed the teaser to come. I've been I'm looking forward to this, and I'm looking forward to the long discussion. I have a feeling I will need a lot of Iron Brew in stock for it, and currently I will admit this to all the viewers because they will know. I am down to this was all I could find at my local stores. If you can't see this at the moment, Fleet. Because of the way the camera's working, but it's literally you know those small 750ml bottles of Iron Brew.
Oh dear!
That's
oh dear!
all I could find in my corner shop, so I've literally
Emergency
been
reserves.
limited to that today. And
Emergency reserves.
It is bad. There seems to be a Iron Brew shortage going on, and it's especially affecting me. I'm not good with this. But no, thank you for being here. It's been a lot of fun. And,
I've enjoyed it myself. What a great way to get this whole thing started.
Yeah, and please, everyone, do say... normally I put a question at the end of these videos. I think the question is going to be, what ideas do you have from this scenario? Please do put them comment down below. And talk.
I will be watching.
And
I will be watching the comments.
Fleet will be watching. And thank you for listening. Hope you've all enjoyed. And as said, please do also comment below if you've liked this sort of idea. We will try and work on these in future. As you've seen with Fleet, I have no qualms. If you don't wish to appear on camera, you don't have to appear on camera if anyone's interested in being on here and chatting away these things. And I like the idea of doing this, but I have to make sure it works, because...
I am a great test case because I am a small boy with small subscriber base.
Not that! It's more a case of... You and I already have worked together on a couple of occasions, but we already have the kind of relationship where I trust you to tell me if it's not working. You are like me. You are blunt enough. You are going to explain if something's not working. Whereas
oh yes,
most of many others who I work with are too polite, and it's taken me ages to train Drac out of calling me doctor every 5 seconds, even though we're friends. The moment we go on recording, he's calling me doctor every 5 seconds. I'm going, no, you don't need to remind me or everyone else. It's on the channel. Thank you very much. But let's go. We're slowly getting there. We're slowly getting. Anyway.
So I think that's ladies and gentlemen, it's been, if I may, it's been a pleasure to be here with you on Dr. Clarke's channel as always. Hopefully you'll probably see more of me in future. I mean, obviously, if you come down to the Rambling Corner where I am,
he's got his own YouTube channel. Please do go and look it up. There'll be a link to it down below as well. I'll put a link in it somewhere in the video. And it's worthwhile going and looking at the ramblings. They are long, but they are fun. They are great things to have in the background.
My advice would be, my advice to you would be, if you're going to enjoy a ramblings, pick something else to do, either a video game to play, or you're going on a long drive, or you're on a long journey, or something like that. Just plug your earphones in and just listen to me in the background.
I have to
best way to consume ramblings.
The first ones I really listened to the whole way through, rather than just bits of. I was driving down to Cornwall, doing the house hunting. And they did keep me going for most of the route. It's a 6-hour drive, and the rambling, a single episode of Ramblings would cover me for most of the route.
I try.
Anyway, thank you very much, and well, I'm just going to stick up the final image, and thank you, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Toodles.
Are we done?
Just letting it get to the full 20 seconds, because other people get upset because the things appear in front of my face, and then they complain.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, that's the 20 seconds.